This is Nan McKay again, and we have been speaking with Kent Watkins. He has done a part one, and I urge you, if you're on part two and you haven't listened to part one, listen to that one first, because I would like to take this into a next realm. And Kent has such an interesting background where he's been very involved globally. You probably got that from the beginning when we talked about China. But he's been involved in many countries and the decisions that are going on in many countries and getting their input on a variety of topics. So I would like him, if you would, Kent, to take this to the global level. What are you seeing as the result and the actions that need to be taken at a global level, and what will be the impact globally in general?
Thank you again, Nan. So let me think about that. For example, on May 18th, next week, a week from Monday, the Academy is having a reprise with the head of the U.S. delegation to the World Urban Forum that took place in February, just before, in Abu Dhabi, just before everything stopped. And that's with Assistant Secretary Appleton and Cindy, his staff person who heads up the International Relations Office. And I hope Carla Hills, the former Secretary of HUD, who is on Davos and a number of other many international groups, in which we'll all get on Zoom or WebEx in this case, and about 20 of us talk about the world situation. So I'll have a little more to talk about after that, but the way I posed it to Secretary Appleton was, just think of if Thucydides and Shakespeare and Einstein and others like that were sitting around a table talking about the asteroid that first hit the Earth and the dinosaurs disappeared, on up through the arc of history of all disasters, whether it was earthquakes or volcanoes or germs or wars. What happens to, in our case, in my opinion, housing and urban development? What can we blue sky about? Now, nobody can forecast the future because there are all these black swans, as the term is used, about very large uncertainties that happen, so that if we have the playbook, we have to have very nimble and very high level leadership that can be flexible and change after you have the playbook. Obviously, you got to have good plans in place. And I think one of the things that we're going to see, I think, or we may see, is a lot of centrifugal and centripetal forces going on at the same time. So some of the centripetal forces will probably be countries saying, wait a minute, do we really want to have so much multinational trade and dependence on other countries, so that nation states themselves are going to say, we want to be maybe a little more self-sufficient. Now, this will be played out in elections and political ideologies that I don't want to get into, other than look at the broader picture of seeing the kinds of shortfalls that every country is going to look at and say, how much can we depend on each other as countries or on other international organizations in the future? And there'll be a little hedging, probably, a little more reserves of equipment and ventilators or masks. But let me interrupt this by just putting in the minds of the watcher, if I may, a poem of Kafafi, who wrote that marvelous other poem called Ithaca, if you're familiar with it. And this one is called Things Ended. And it's something that I use in other lectures in academia and to corporations. And it reads like this. Let me put my head down, if you don't mind, for a little while. Engulfed by fear and suspicion, mind agitated, eyes alarmed, we try desperately to invent ways out, plan how to avoid, see the planning process here, the obvious danger that threatens us so terribly. Yet, we're mistaken. That's not the danger ahead. The news was wrong, for we didn't hear it or didn't get it right. Think about that. The news was wrong, that is the data or information, or we didn't hear it the way we interpreted it, or we didn't get it right. Another disaster, one we never imagined, suddenly, violently descends upon us, and finding us unprepared, there's no time now, sweeps us away. So I think what's in the gist of that poem for strategic planning purposes is we can plan all we want, and we can think we have this emergency, and we can put the oil reserves in Oklahoma tank refinery and tanks, and have all the ventilators that we want, and then something else comes that we aren't prepared for. So of course that's called the Black Swan. And all I'm saying is let's not think that we have everything solved, because we'll never have everything solved. This leads me to a second historical metaphor that we use in the military, strategic planning, corporate and government, called Johari's window. This was in the 12th century this came about, Nan, and Secretary Rumsfeld used only one of the cells of the panes of the four window when he talked about what he knew in terms of intelligence as far as instruments of mass destruction in Iraq, as you remember well that case study perhaps. Well, I think that the window, there are four windows or four panes in the window. And basically, the first one is one who doesn't know, but knows that he doesn't know. This is an illiterate person that is open to teaching. The second pane is one who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know. This is a dumb person and would be dumb forever. Sorry about that. Third pane is one who knows and knows that he knows. This is a person of knowledge, and we should get to know that person. We call them experts, and of course everybody isn't an expert who says he is, but let's pretend we're using the Platonic ideal here. And finally, there is the person, one who knows and doesn't know that he knows. This is a person who is unaware, and so we bring it to his or her or their attention. Now, keep that metaphor in mind too as we talk about the future. Does that make sense to you, Nan?
Yes, I'm very familiar with that window, and I think it's very true.
So other plague, now let's talk about climate change for a minute. I don't care what you call it, but whatever is happening to our planet, the sea is rising because we see Norfolk and Miami and many other cities being overwhelmed by the supermoon every few months. And whatever as I say, we want to call it, famines that are happening, droughts that are happening. It could be just a blip in a billion years, but whatever it is, we obviously want to mitigate it. No matter what political persuasion we are. So I don't want to get into semantics. I was involved, yes, in Paris with the agreement and with the World Urban Forum, which meets every 2 years. We're obviously dealing with that and with the Sustainable Development Goals. We're dealing with that as one of the 17 issues, of which cities are only another one of that. But it's something that will be with us, whatever we call it. And so, what are we going to do about that? As Greenland gets greener, it becomes a geopolitical problem for the rest of the world. And as the Security Council is dealing with what do we call this virus even, and trying to figure out the wording on the present resolution, I think that we're continuing to examine how this changes what we do. In past pandemics, we had wars that occurred as a result, or we had nation states or societies that totally disappeared as a result of germs, whether it was the Native Americans who dealt with smallpox that was brought to them by Europeans, or other places in the world in which some kind of transmission of germs would happen. So on the world scene, I think it's too early to tell, other than to start to pose some of these questions and to look in that direction of, as we have our international meetings. I mean, Davos will be coming up next year. We have the World Urban Forum. We have a lot of climate meetings that are happening around the world, and sustainable development. City planners have to decide what they're going to do. Transportation planners have to decide what they're going to do. So how do we continue to deal with the four pains, not the four horsemen of the apocalypse, hopefully, but the four pains of the Johari window, and reach out to as many persons who want to learn more, which you are a part of this transmission of knowledge, and working with HUD, which I think are doing a very impressive job at this point in terms of looking at data-driven information. And one of the things that I want to bring up in the Academy virtual luncheon next week from Monday is this disparity in terms of race and how the pandemic has impacted, as well as, of course, the diversity of income issue. But particularly, I have already asked some people at HUD. There's a new evaluation czar at HUD, and there's a new information or data czar at HUD, as we call them, based on a law that was passed a couple of years ago, in which every agency was supposed to come up with, just like we have inspectors general now at every agency. And so my question to those persons is, why shouldn't public housing and Section 8 and RAD and all the other related programs that have so much good data now in terms of the demographics, also begin to add, in terms of occupancy intake, some information that we would need to begin to find out of who has been impacted in the public housing sites and the Section 8 developments and so forth. Now, I've been told that Governor Cuomo, maybe because he was also Secretary of HUD, has required some of that data to already be developed in the public housing sites. So I've inquired in the state of New York. So I've inquired about that, and I'll let you know if and when that is, how robust that is. But my point is, I don't think it's dealing with all of the population that we are dealing with in terms of low and moderate income housing target populations, and that it is important for us to also add to the data that we already have, because when we go up to Congress, that the evidence-based information for the homeless has been a boon in receiving far more funding than we used to get in the past. And I hope that will be the case, that we can begin to present the same kind of thing as to how this impacts low and moderate income housing, not only here, but that this kind of model can also happen in other countries around the world as we began to exchange the information through the organizations that I've talked about.
Well, I think people will find it very interesting. You brought it down to the families that live in assisted housing, but I think people will find it interesting that your HUD's role is more than just that. And what people may not realize is the city, urban, community development, those kinds of actions that HUD is also involved in. And I think that's a lot of what you were talking about in the beginning of this particular segment, that they are much more maybe on this global stage than we realize.
Well, I think they are, and I think their first mission, of course, is to deal with what we're doing on the domestic level, but we also are constantly learning from other countries, and hopefully they learn from us. But right now, I think, we're all exceptional in wanting to, as individuals worldwide and as countries worldwide, to defeat what is happening to us so tragically right now, and to try to move to the next stage in how we can plan and incorporate mechanisms that will sustain our ability to resist this, as well as other issues that we will have to come back to and take up the same ideas and arguments to make this a better world as well as a better country.
Well, thank you so much, Kent. It's really interesting to think about this in a little bit different way, both historical and globally. So I really appreciate the time that you took to do this, and we will look forward maybe to doing it again after your May 18th meeting.
Well, thank you, and I hope we can make the Academy meeting also available through HUD or other venues, and continue the dialogue that we are hopefully starting here. Thank you so much, Nan, for all your help and efforts.
Okay, bye-bye.